Welcome to another artist conversation in our series, Pathways for Dialogue, Past, Present, Future.
Thanks for being here. So I'm just going to start with, some brief introductions, and then we'll get right into the conversation and leave some time maybe for some questions if you have any. So I'm just going to introduce our panelists here this evening. I'm going to start with Niama Safia Sandy. She's a New York-based curator, producer, and multi-disciplinary artist. Sandy's curatorial practice delves into the human story through the critical lens of healing, history, migration, music, race, and ritual. She's an agitator who calls into question and makes sense of the nature of modern life and to celebrate our shared humanity in the process. Her aim is to leverage history, the visual, written, and performative arts, chiefly those of the global Black diaspora, and to tell stories we know in ways we have not yet thought to tell them, and to lift us all to a higher state of historical, ontological, and spiritual wholeness in the process. So the following artist is Laylah Amatullah Barrayn. She focuses her inquiries on the cultures and identities within the global Black diaspora with a special interest in memory and the lived experiences of women. Her practice, spanning 20 years, includes exhibition organizing and essay writing. She's frequently on assignment for the New York Times and has been commissioned by The Guardian, Le Monde, National Geographic, NPR, Vogue, and The New Yorker. Her monograph, We Are Present, 2020 in Portraits, was published with the support of Magnum Foundation. She's also the co-author of MFAN, Women Photographers of the African Diaspora, the first anthology in nearly 30 years that highlights photography produced by women of African descent. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, and she is a recipient of numerous grants. Barrayn is currently completing a book on contemporary Black photographers. And our final panelist, Adama Delphine Fawundu, is a photographer and visual art. Did I say it wrong?
Yeah,
is a visual artist of Mendi and
Bube
descent. She uses multiple mediums to create works within themes of the collective unconscious, identity, utopia, decolonization, and stories of the past, present, and future. Fawundu published the critically acclaimed book, MFAN, Women Photographers of the African Diaspora, with Laylah. For decades, she has exhibited both nationally and internationally. Her works are in the permanent collections of the Brooklyn Museum of Art, Princeton Museum of Art, Bryn Mawr College, the Petrucci Family Foundation of African American Art, the Brooklyn Historical Society, and many more. She's currently an assistant professor for visual arts at Columbia University. So thank you. Welcome to our panelists. And so just to sort of delve right in, I have a couple questions, for the group, and then a couple individual ones. So I was thinking about how all of your practices seem to have a conceptual framework around care and community. And so I'm wondering how you've come to the decision to have your work be this way. Because for me, it's always it almost reads as a concept, right? The same way we think of other formal aspects of art, but care and community also seems so entwined in what you're doing. So can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, I think being in community is an integral part of our practice, right? We've all met each other through communal experiences. For example, me and Delphine met through a friend named Rada, who was a filmmaker, and I met Rada. Well, I knew Rada, but one day I went to an event. My friend Dumia would open up her apartment to have other artists come in to sell their works. And Rada was there one day, and Rada mentioned that she had a friend named Delphine who was working on a photographic project on women, and we should meet. And so from being in that space, being in that communal space where I was opened up and I was essentially turned into a market space, I met with another artist who introduced me to another artist, and we began to build from there, you know. So I think like that our foundation has been part of a communal practice, a communal, being physically in one space and building and thinking about different ideas.
That's interesting that you mentioned, because then I think about how we met through another communal way, and I think like one of the things that everything has in common is us wanting to do something for the larger sake. Like we think about the archive, we think about the future and what we're leaving for future generations. I know with me, yeah, it was just really always I started off wanting to do documentaries because I remember going to college and doing deep dives into stories of the past and wondering, why didn't I ever learn about this? You know, why is information being held from me? So I always wanted to be able to tell stories that would impact larger communities. And that's why I began doing photography in the first place, you know? So.
Of like, am I supposed to add? I'm kidding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, from a curatorial perspective.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much, right? Because I'm like listening to you and I'm like recreating all of those moments in my mind. And even Laylah, I think we met doing Social Media Week in Lagos, right?
We met before that. We met, well, there was another communal space in Brooklyn, Harriet's Alter Ego. It was a community gallery that gave access to local artists to show their work in a legit gallery. And you were curating.
I was their first intern ever. What year is this? So this is like 17 years ago?
Pre-Barclays. It was where the Barclays was at before.
Yes, no, quite literally.
Yeah, literally.
For those of you familiar with Brooklyn, so where the Net store is where this original space was, and then they moved a bit. Was that north? Is that north? South to another building, which had a beautiful gallery space and a back garden space, which I loved programming. But, you know, to that point, what do we come from if not communities, right? You know, I often talk about, I have like this talk that I do where I'm like, you know, where does this begin for me? It begins looking out of a window of a sixth floor apartment on Rockaway Parkway, looking at the Labor Day parade, right? So for me, this is so germane to that process and thinking about, you know, what do we see and who do we see? And how do we make that visible for everyone?
The other thing you think about is like, just look at the past, right? Of people living in spaces that tried to annihilate them, try to oppress them, and what do? We create communities. We create Maroon communities, we create Quilombo communities, we create Gullah communities, we create Harriet's Alter Ego, right? Yeah. We create all of these spaces because that's how we survive, that's how we live, that's how we thrive. So it's just a part of us in our DNA to create space where people try to keep us from space, but we're here anyway.
I mean, literally, in the context of Carnival, that's exactly what's happening, right?
Yeah.
Talking about Camboulet, talking about all of these different instances where like the drum is outlawed and we figure out a way to like flip the thing and make it something else, right? Exactly. And so here we are making and remaking and trying to bring other people with us in the process.
So this leads me to my next question.
Brilliant questions, by the way. Thank you so much, really.
Thinking about the studio space, right? And we think about it sort of like within sort of a traditional sense, the way people think about the artist is sort of in their like little room, the sort of singular, right? Working on their craft and mastery. I've always thought that for a lot of our communities, the studio space is a bit more expansive. And when I think about your work in terms of how you practice, you know, when you're filming, for instance, and taking photographs, this requires you to actually sort of engage, right, with the space around you, even if not with the people. So I'm thinking, like, how does that notion then of this sort of like expansive studio space, you know, work for you creative? How do you bring that into your creative practice?
May I? So I literally was just talking with Claudia about this and some work that is like trying to make its way out of my body and into the world. It's not quite there yet, but it's gonna happen. And so I was sharing with her, there is like a mural. Is anyone in the room familiar with Jeffrey Holder? Is okay. just one hand. We're gonna change that, and that's good. So there's actually gonna be a text coming out through Duke University Press that I'll be contributing to. So last year there was a writer's retreat, like for everyone to share what they've been thinking through and working on and writing on. And so he has a mural that he was commissioned for Cari Festa in like 1962 or 1963, and they get the sketch and they say in their feedback, oh, this doesn't look like Trinidad. This looks like the American South. For context, additional context, for those of you who are not familiar with Jeffrey Holder, incredible visionary artist across many disciplines. You may know him as the 7-Up man, depending on how old you are. I personally feel like that is deeply reductive, and I like, the one person that told me that was like, don't ever say that again. But he also is a Bond villain, so I think, is it Live and Let Die, whichever the Baron Samedi in that. Also an incredible photographer, incredible painter, incredible choreographer, working with Ailey, Dance Theater of Harlem. Also a director in his own right. The first person of African descent to win a Tony Award, not just one, but 2 in the same year for The Wiz. I mean, you guys, please. Anyway, so, yes, to a wonderful woman, Carmen de Lavallade. If you're not familiar with her, Google her too. Point is, I just thought, that's interesting. Like, what makes you be able to look at a drawing and say, this is where this isn't? And so right now I'm in this place where I'm interested in like these collapsing ideas of space, and also what it might mean then to like purposefully collapse that space in diasporic context. Am I answering your question?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. I hope. Thank you.
And so for like the rest of you, I know like Delphine, for instance, with your video work and photography, like you go into these sort of spaces, into the landscape, into the community. How does that notion then of this sort of expansive studio play into your work?
Absolutely. I'm so interested in the idea of exactly that, right? Like you look at a space, like if you look at one of my videos that were, maybe I go to Cuba, I go to the South, like I go to all of these different places, and you don't know where is where because it is actually, like the earth is one place, right? And I'm really interested in the way that we historically, and when I say we, I mean people of African descent, understood how to be with the land, understood how to commune with the land. So even like through these harsh systems of slavery and colonialism, you have the seeds from Sierra Leone that are planted in the sea islands, right? And knowing what to do with the indigo, with the rice, with the, so I'm really interested in that notion of space and the energy that lives in space. And so therefore I'm in these different spaces and my body is literally communing in those spaces. And when I make the work, it's a documentation of that. I cannot put that into words, but hopefully what I'm feeling and the transference of energy is shared with the audiences. So it's definitely this, it's so expansive. It's this time, it's the past, it's the present, it's the future, it's everything all at once. And it's, like I'll give you an example, going to where my family is from in Sierra Leone, the Fawundus come from a place called Mano, which is off the coast of Sierra Leone, but the Krim people, who are my father's ancestors, when they migrated there, they were not a part of Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is a colonial construct, right? And they settled there, but because of colonialism, they were forced to mix in with the Mende people, but still they always, this is who we are, but the island was a refuge. Like, this is ours, we're just gonna do what we do here and just live. When I was actually on a boat with my mom, we both had the same trip. We both rolled up on the 3-hour trip, rolled up to the shores of Mano, and we also went to the shores of Defusky Island in South Carolina. And we did Mano first. When we were riding up to Defusky, I said, oh my God, Mommy, where is this? She said, Mano, and we both could not believe, even the way the trees sit in the water and the shape of the trees. Like, it was so beautiful, you know, to have that experience and to see how this energy exists in different points of the earth. So yeah, so it definitely goes to history, expanding to like our present, past, future, but then also to the children. Like, I come from a background of teaching children, high school and middle school, and whenever I'm making work, I'm also talking to them. You know, I know what was missing. I know what is missing from our public school system, and I know what works. I know what it means when someone finds out their power, you know, that exists within their bodies, you know, despite all of the craziness that we try to put into these children's heads. And so I am expanding that idea of who we are and how we are in this world as I'm thinking about this as well. So I'm always thinking, they're always in the studio with me.
Did you want to answer anything too, thinking about the studio?
I'm thinking about the studio space, you know, working as a photojournalist. The studio space is where I show up. It's usually, I'm not sure where I'm going to show up. I'm not sure what the energy is going to be. I'm not sure who I am photographing. I'm meeting the person or the people at that moment, which is very exciting for me, you know, because I'm always full of questions. I'm coming with questions, and I'm always thinking about different ways to ask and different ways to inquire, you know. So my studio is constantly shifting, physically, energetically, you know, in terms of content, you know, and that keeps me on my toes. So,
Yeah, I mean, that's the striking thing in a way, right, between your practices. One is, you know, a more creative bent. It's sort of a little bit more planned. There's a kind of an intention when you go out and you shoot, and you sort of don't know what you're going to necessarily engage with. So it's a really interesting sort of
Actually, the weird thing is that I don't know.
Well,
I have no idea.
I mean, like, yeah.
But you like pick a
you
location.
pick
That's
a location.
all I know is the location.
You have the
I have no
location.
idea what the location looks like or what I'm going to see when I get there.
Okay.
It's so weird. Yeah, it's like, it's all I know is the information.
Right.
But the physical space, what that frame is going to look like.
Yeah, no, yeah,
clueless.
you work with
Yeah,
the energy
it's
of the
really
space.
interesting,
which is
very
good.
interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. Because especially too, like thinking about that idea. So, you know, I think diasporic artists from the African diaspora, was Caribbean or Africa, and we sort of think about, we use imagination as sort of like a tool for liberation, and a tool, just, you know, as a tool. And so, there's a quote by a Native American poet that I like. He said, "If it's fiction, it better be true." And when I looked at that, I said, oh, you know, this sort of makes me think about sort of the work that I do and that you do in terms of thinking about creating these worlds, creating these images that don't exist, and having those images sort of lead to a form of liberation. So I'm always wondering about the difference between truth and fact, right? And so looking at your work, Laylah, you know, photojournalism, sort of at its sort of heart, people think about truth, right? That you're photographing, you're documenting an event that's based in truth. But those of us who maybe look at photography more critically know that there's editing that's happening, right? There's no such thing as a true photo. What you're seeing is what the photographer decides to frame, and what gets left out is almost as important as what ends up in the newspaper, right? And then there's another editor involved there too. So that sort of, you know, I guess the shift, that idea between truth and fact, I was wondering, how do you think about those two words in your practice, and even for you too, if you could, if you want to. But.
Absolutely.
I think about what is important. You know, I cover things, and I am drawn towards stories that I feel should be uncovered, that I feel should be examined, that I feel should have the light shone upon. You know, I feel injustice is one of those stories, and injustice, stories around injustice is always something that I feel needs to have a platform, needs to be examined, you know, and so that comes with the subjectivity of who I am, you know, as a person, as a human. You know, when there's injustice, we need to, my mind just went, in another place, but I feel like it isn't, when we talk about the myth of objectivity, that is something that bothers me. Goes into the idea of truth and what is facts. But what I really feel that we should be examining is looking toward what's the word? Oh my God.
Experience?
But just having a better human experience. You know what I mean, and not covering up the things that are regressing us as a culture, as a humanity, as a society. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea of world making and like imagining futures, bringing audiences along with me to imagine as well. Like I'll take the picture that's in this collection, the blue like black in Argentina, right? So when I went to, so this is an example, like I had no idea what, the dress that I'm wearing, I bought from a thrift shop in Argentina and used it the same day to do the photos. Who knew that picture would exist, right? But in my mind, I had the idea of Afro-Argentines, and I wanted to make something that called to that experience and that history. And reading about the history of Argentina, which tried to erase its strong African roots, right? Here I am embodying a deity, right? A water deity in this blue dress that I got from a thrift shop in Argentina that hangs against this colonial constructed wall and is this skin, you know what I mean? That has everything to do with the history of the space. We think about the tango, which is the national dance, comes from the drums and Shango, like this, and this candomblé, all of this stuff. But that's the part that we don't hear about. So for me, it's kind of like revealing these stories that have been covered and expanding ideas of what we perceive to be the truth or stories of the past. And then, because I think that as we could do that, we could also expand our ideas of possibilities of what we think that we can do in the future. So, or even how we see ourselves. I mean, sometimes how we see ourselves is so limited based on these, social constructs that we are surrounded by. So I'm always just pushing against all of that and thinking about new ways to see and be in the world and to think about our past, present, and future.
Thanks for that alley-oop, by the way. So this work that's trying to make its way, one of the things that I'm looking at is these sites of resistance, right? And what does that mean? That could be a slave rebellion, that could be a situation where someone like developed a cultural movement in that place. So this is kind of like what is pushing me in terms of what geography I'm looking at right now. But again, these things happened 300 and 400 years ago, 25 years ago, 75 years ago. We don't know what happened there, what it looked like at that point. But that's like the fun part, right? How do we, again, collapse the space, but also time to consider those things? And also part of what I'm hoping to do with that is, as you said, how do we create this space for transformation for the viewer and perhaps even for ourselves as the makers of the work? So really thinking about, I'm gonna just go ahead and say it. I think right now we are in this very disempowered place post racial reckoning. And so how do we get our power back? I think we reconnect to those specific instances of things that we know actually happened, where somebody was like, this is my line, don't cross it, right? So I think that offers us a really interesting place to think and do things from. So yeah, hope that answered your question.
Yeah, because you as you were saying that, I was thinking about sort of these sort of in-between spaces. We've had to navigate, I think artists, especially artists of color, I think have had to navigate a lot of these sort of in-between spaces, right? You have the tension between beauty and sort of the political, right? You're making work that's saying something powerful, and at the same time, sort of like beauty becomes like a tool or the aesthetic of the image. And of course, there's some who work counter to that, right? But it's also like that becomes sort of like away in the line, right? So I was curious then in terms of thinking, how do you strategically like use beauty? And I say it with, quotation marks in your work, because there's a real aesthetic to it. I mean, there's sort of, you see them and they're like, they draw you in, because even with you were talking just now about the blue dress, and I was just like, like, what does blue mean to you? And you think of it as a diasporic color, and a color that just sort of has all this sort of historic resonance, in your work. So yeah, how do you engage with beauty? And even thinking about your photographs, the richness of the color. I'm always taken by like sort of the portraits and then what people are wearing on the street in the background, and it sort of pulls you in. So, so clearly, you're using that as some sort of visual strategy, and I want to sort of know more about it.
I would say it's not so intentional. It's something that I realized afterwards that, people are like, oh, the photos are so beautiful. But then when I come closer, I start to peel things apart. And I think about that, like even the idea, my mom told me stories about Mami Wata, right? And the water, and just, I don't know if you feel this, but when I sit in front of the waves, I think it's the most beautiful thing. And I know that if I keep, there's a balance, right? And so there's this thing that draws you in, but then there's a thing that you have you have to know what you're doing in there. Or then there's anything could happen at that moment, right? Even to the best swimmer, there's a tension, right? And so for me, it's kind of what I realized. So it's not necessarily a strategy, but I realized this is how I make work, And it is beautiful, like it does draw you in, but then if you stay long enough and you start to think about the layers and what it is that you're seeing, then you start to think about things differently and know that there is that tension in all of the work. I think my photos and my videos are very seductive. Maybe the sculptures, I don't know. I'm just making them for the first time. I'm not sure. They might be a little anti-aesthetic. Because I don't do things symmetrically. Like I kind of let it be. And so, sometimes there's, I don't know, I have to look at them a little bit and see, because I think sometimes there's something that people are not sure how close to get to it once I start, because my sculptures, they have the feel of masquerades from indigenous communities, and you're like, okay, is there some, what's going on with that sculpture? We see a little bit of magical stuff, and yeah, who knows? But maybe that's what they're supposed to be in the space, and maybe you're not supposed to just run up on something. Maybe you need to stay back a little bit and observe a little bit before you get close, or maybe you're not supposed to get close. So I think about all of those things, but I wouldn't say, it's something that I'm learning about the way that I make, because I allow myself to make. I'm not necessarily planning it. This is just what my body is doing.
Well, in terms of beauty, and in terms of color, you mentioned something about color, right? So I do use a lot of color in my photography, mostly. Of course, I trained in black and white photography, learned black and white film, learned printing my work on black and white, to as much as I could, I spent a lot of time getting a strong foundation with black and white film. And once I felt comfortable enough, I got out of there. And then I put some color film in my camera, because for me, color always meant more than what it was. Color always had energy. Color always had context, and color always had movement. There was always another story to the color, and color had power in it. Even looking at how my mother and my grandmother dressed, and the decisions that they made, and why red, and why did we wear white to the funeral, why did we wear white to the tribute to the ancestors, and even looking at our family photo albums, the photographs were in color, and there I understood, as a woman of African descent, that melanin, that power in that melanin. There's a picture of my grandfather in our photo album, and he is chiseled, he has a silver ring on, and he's holding his face, and he is what I would call blue-black. You know, we understand that as this deep, uninterrupted melanin, and I always wanted to show examples like that in my photography. You know, color means so much throughout the diaspora. When you go to the Gullah Islands, which is where my family's from, you know, many of the houses are painted blue to ward off the spirits. You know, and so you have, you know, when you say something like green and white, you know, Nigeria, you like, it's the nation state, but you know, there's color represents so much. When we talk about the Labor Day parade on Eastern Parkway, all you see is the flags in color, you know, and I would always want to record that in color because of the energy, because of the meaning behind all of the richness behind the color. So color means so much. It's movement, it's feeling, it's energy, it's context, it's history, and that's why I'm always drawn to it.
Cool. Well, I know we're want to leave some time for questions.
Can I answer?
But I think Niama wanted to say something. Go right ahead. Yeah, no.
All right. So, you know, I'm actually in this place, maybe I'm the opposite, but moving out of being the opposite of you right now. Because, you know, like, if you've ever seen the paintings, they are black, like, and it's very intentional. I'm using, like, all the blacks possible, bone black, carbon black, every type of black. But then there's sometimes, like, a band of color somewhere in there that's like, it's funny that you said blue-black, because, like, I hadn't actually thought about that. Because, you know, like, I do have this relationship with blue. It's different to Delphine's relationship with blue. Like, I even, like, went so far as to dye my hair blue at one point. But there's something about it that lends itself, for me, in terms of why I choose to use the blacks in this way, is thinking about the expansiveness of that, and also thinking about, like, the way that light interacts with black, which I think is something that we underestimate as an almost like possible mirror-like surface if we allow it to be. But, you know, in the context of moving into these maybe landscapey things that apparently I want to do, of course that's going to shift into, you know, the use of more color and really responding to the landscapes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So are there any questions? Oh, there we go.
I knew it was going to be you. The most vivacious person in the room.
Congratulations, first of all, just to see Black women and be here and just to hear about photography. You know, it's been one of those things that you don't see a lot of, and especially with Black women. And, you know, I was just wondering, has it been any place where you were afraid to bring out that great energy of who you are and where you come from, and this Black history of Black women, and even in your paintings, just has it been something that's been a challenge for you to come out? Because, you know, me being an artist in the art world, you know, I haven't really seen very many women photographers, and it's just wonderful to see you guys up there and put that medium out there again within your medium and what you're doing. But, you know, I just wonder, has it been a challenge for you guys to kind of focus on that and bring that imagery out of your strongness? And as we say in the Comedics, you all are ma'at, and that's a very powerful person in the universe. And, you know, that being you, I just wanted to know if there was any challenges for yourselves trying to focus on that kind of style of work and put it out there.
Yeah, I think once I realized at an early age that there was a sentiment in the world that tried to crush my voice, I got even bigger. You know, I got as big as I could possibly get. And also understanding that I am in a tradition, coming in a tradition of very powerful artists, women included, who work across all mediums, who had no problem expressing themselves because they were so tapped into the source and understood what the BS was in the world, that they understood what the true source was and who they were as a creation of the Creator. And so I draw from that. I draw from that power, and I'm always mindful to be clear and to be vigilant about the ideas that are coming forth toward me that might be trying to, annihilate me and to make my voice smaller. And also in terms of women photographers, growing up in New York City, we have a very robust community here. The unfortunate thing is that there is a very strong component of erasure that is present, that does not allow for many women photographers to have their works supported and showcased at the institutions here. But there are brilliant women here making photography and telling stories, and so much so that we did a book on them. We did a book on 118 of the photographers out of the so many, to show that yes, we are here, and yes, we need to be part of this conversation, and yes, we will be in the archive even though we see you trying to erase us. This is our pushback. Here is our book, and hoping that people will be inspired by our efforts. But they're an incredible community of photographers, and even now more so with social media, you see them popping up. But growing up in the 80s and 90s, we had a very strong community of women image makers.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, when we did put out the book, it was so amazing how, without having a publicist, we ended up in all of the major press, from Vogue to the New York Times to the, it like just go on and did this big tour.
2017.
Yeah, yeah. And all of a sudden it was like, wow. And I will say, we must say that it started a trend, right?
Oh yeah.
So many different organizations came out of this, and sometimes it just means that you need to just open up the door. And so when we could open our own doors. We make our own seats.
It speaks to us, what you mentioned earlier. We make work for the collective. We make work for things that are bigger than us. And that's how we did that, sure.
So for me, because I am technically not a person people think about as an artist, it's an interesting little moment, because they're like, oh, right? Because the painting is the size of the wall behind you, right? So it's a whole situation. But to your point about making work this for the collective, so I wrote this component of this ongoing performance that I've been doing, well, really having other people do, which is funny. And so maybe we'll talk offline about that, about why that is. But there's a performance that I have been directing since maybe 2017, called The Circle of Trust. And so with that, it's usually variable, 3 different practitioners, whether it's a sound healer, singer, a dancer, whatever, usually just pulling on these different modalities. And so in 2019, I was invited to do an iteration of it in DC, and I wrote this I guess a text, if you will, that was part of it was sampling and referencing Baldwin, Morrison, Lord, and Hurston. And also there's another part. But in 2021, I was invited to do something, and I chose to make a sound piece out of this thing. And then for some reason, there's a young writer, Camille Bacon. I sent, for whatever reason, she posted something in her stories, and I was just like, oh, you might enjoy this. What's your email address? And I sent it to her, and now it's a thing that she has pulled me aside and been like, oh my God, I listen to this every day. Can I share it with my other writer friends to have it transform them as well? And it's just whoa, okay, sure, because I guess that's what it was supposed to do. And it's this interesting thing where you just have to let the work do what the work is meant to do, and you have to get out of the way sometimes. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. This is a beautiful talk. I appreciate all of your work. I wanted to ask, what are you each looking forward to in your work and in general?
I'm looking forward to a lot more rest. No, like really spiritual rest, and really reconfiguring my intentions and motivations on how I show up in the world and why I do what I want to do. Just trying to really purify and simplify who I am with the time that I have left in the world. You know, I really want to feel good about, and I feel good about my work, but I just need to make sure that I am doing this work because I want to, and it has incredible intentions, and it's going to go out in the world and do what it does, and has good energy into it, you know. So really looking forward to giving myself a lot of what I give out to the world. Yeah.
That's everything.
Anyone else?
Sure. I am looking forward to getting out of my own way, first of all, but also really, you know, with what is coming, I have to like go places, and I have to go look at things, and I have to like be in a headspace that will allow me to see what I need to see. You know what I mean? So to your point, rest is a part of that. You know, setting an intention is part of that. Being able to just like move with discipline is a part of that as well. So, yeah.
I think like I love the rest and giving to yourself what you give out. Like I feel like I want to have time to also think about and reflect on these things that I'm putting out, because I feel like sometimes you could be almost like a machine, like you're just putting things out. And like my mind works so quickly, and I just want to make. And so I need to just sit down for a little bit, reflect, and to listen. Like there's a lot of listening that goes into making work, and time to just read more, have a new understanding of my previous understandings. You know, I'm really into that, and I'm seeing what else I can learn. Like it's all about learning and sharing and giving.
It's funny that you say that. Mm-hmm. So you remember you had a show at Mokata in June of 2015? June?
Yeah.
Am I imagining this? Okay.
No.
So that week, that was like a Thursday, right? Did
I
it
think
open?
so, Thursday.
So that week.
You have a good memory. That's
I
why.
have a
No,
ridiculous
I was just
memory.
like, did I have a show? Yeah, I did.
Yeah, my memory is like, it's weird.
No,
It's the
that's
gift
good,
and the curse.
girl. You better.
No, sometimes I don't want to remember.
Okay.
Anyway, so it's true. Anyway, so I was at like a pizza shop in the Lower East Side that Sunday, and I saw a person who I was like, oh my God, is that David Cross? Does anybody here know who David Cross is, the actor, comedian? So fast forward to Thursday. Oh my God, why would David Cross be at Mokata right now? But I guess he is, so here we are. How about it was Remy Youngerman, and now Remy and I have had this like relationship. This is like 8 or 9 years later now. And he's like, you know, he's gone on to like represent the Netherlands and the Venice Biennale. Like, and it's literally, I walked over to him and I was like, so I think, imagine me walking over to him and saying, I think I saw you at the pizza shop this weekend. Completely ridiculous, because he was like, you know, Remy, if you ever met Remy is like the nicest person you'll ever meet. And so he was just like, sure. And, you know, we ended up exchanging information, and I want to say that might have been like one of the first real studio visits I ever did. And this is like maybe like another year before I actually do my first exhibition and come into the space officially, so to speak. But, you know, I told that story this weekend because we were sitting across from each other at a dinner on Saturday. And the woman next to me was like, no, you manifested that. You manifested the person that like you needed to like help you move whatever this idea was from being an idea into like something more tangible for you. And I was like, damn, you're right. That's so crazy.
That's interesting, because it makes me think about like, I think it was 1997, like right when I had my first son. I was I was reading about like St. Helena Island, and you know, I was like, I have to go to this place. So as soon as he was 1, me and my 98, me and my sister, we were on a bus to South Carolina to St. Helena Island to physically communicate with Gullah people, and I just think about that's where the light bulb went off. And back then, I was so, me as a young artist, I was so ambitious that I had I'm gonna travel all around the world. I'm gonna go to the Kalimba, I'm gonna go here, I'm gonna go everywhere. I'm gonna apply for this grant, to the Infoco grant, and that's gonna take me all over the world to document the people who retain their culture. And I'm thinking about, wait a second, I'm actually doing that now, right? And I had the way I thought I was gonna do it, it's not that, but it's actually a real focus in my work.
Get out
the way you just have to realize, holy crap, you know.
Sometimes you just gotta speak it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say thank you. Like I think that was a nice place to end.
Yeah.
Where we sort of see how you've come full circle, right?
Yeah.
And thinking about where you want to go in the future, and sort of like imaging that against the past and sort of looking at that. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm doing a little commercial for Laylah's book here.
This is my second book. It was released February 1st, and I have a few copies here if you would like to purchase. I'm telling the story of 2020 only through portraits. So if you're a book lover, photo book lover, you can get it here.
Okay, so please buy it. And thank you.
I have
Enough.
3.
Yeah.
The books are heavy.
So thanks so much for coming tonight. We have another program tomorrow night, another one on Thursday. We're taking a little siesta next week, no programming, but we will be open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And then we start again programming June 1, 2, and 8, 9. So, and we have a party this Saturday from, well, we thought we were closing, but in fact we're extending instead. So please, bring friends, enjoy, rejoice in this space and what all these different panelists, including Lerone, have brought to these conversations. We're creating kind of a vibe in here. So please come back on Saturday. And thanks again to this wonderful panel. Thank you.